It's almost Halloween, and what better way to celebrate than by sharing with you some of my best loved horror novels. As the mist clings to the windows, the leaves shift to a multitude of colors, the rain patters the roof, and the first deep chills steal into your bones, there is no better reprieve than a hot chocolate, a warm blanket, and an eerie novel, the pages old and crinkly between your fingers. Stephen King is the undisputed, king of the horror genre. In fact, he's dabbled in several genres, adding his unnerving touch to psychological thrillers, fantasy adventures, science fiction turns, and even Western romance. His magnum opus is the Dark Tower series, but beyond that, he has dozens upon dozens of books to read, and he's still writing. I can't claim to have read every one, but I've read enough to form my current opinions on which my favorites are. Most lists include the same 7 or so books, and while a few of mine fall into the category of classic King, there might be a couple on my list you haven't heard of too. Before we continue, I'm Riley and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I rant about books, share lore on my favorite bookish worlds, and offer the occasional writing advice. If any of this sounds like your cup of hot chocolate, hit that subscribe button. Posts are on Fridays. Without further ado, here are my top 5 Stephen King reads. Number 1 on my list is Christine. Christine was one of the first Stephen King books I read, which is likely part of why it's remained with me. I don't consider myself a car nerd, and the idea of a killer car might even sound cheesy, but Stephen King pulls it off. It helps that the story is as much about the troubled psychology of the protagonist, Arnie, as it is about the car's victims. Arnie isn't remarkable. In fact, he's painfully ordinary, and that's what makes his story realistic. Overlooked at school, a pimply and bullied teenager who can only dream of having a girlfriend, Arnie is immediately drawn to the rust heap that is Christine. Like most King books, the story is populated with simple but down-to-earth characters. Arnie's life and the people who inhabit it are ordinary, making the extraordinary stand out. Even Christine, on first being purchased by Arnie, doesn't seem that remarkable. Left to rust and break down, she is rescued by Arnie, who, painstakingly, piece by piece, reforms her. However, once Arnie begins the repairs, Christine awakens, to the point where she can speed up the process. Obsessed with his new project, and willing to sink his funds into what at first seems like a hopeless venture, Arnie misses the signs. Parts of the car are restored, which he doesn't remember tackling. Soon, the car is like new, the seats freshly upholstered and her paint gleaming. Unfortunately, Christine, beautiful as she's become, is also deadly. And as she awakens, at first allowing Arnie to find success at his school, Arnie actually loses himself. With every moment he invests in Christine, another part of him fades, until he's no more than the car's mindless tool. The scene where Christine nearly causes Arnie's new girlfriend to choke is unnerving, setting the stage for more carnage to come. Christine is a classic King read, and while it doesn't always make the list, it's remained with me since that first time I read it. Number 2 on my list is Firestarter. Firestarter was one of those novels I knew I'd love before I picked it up. The premise simply intrigued me. One of King's signature tropes is the child protagonist, and in Firestarter we followed the fraught existence of Charlie. Having the ability to start fires big and small, Charlie is hunted by the government. With only her father to protect her, and struggling to conceal her ability, she has had to move from town to town all her life. The organization which strives to take away her freedom has already butchered her mother. And there's a sadness to the tale, because even if they don't catch her, they've still taken away her chance at a normal life. If this premise, The idea of a girl with superpowers who's taken away from her family as a result of developing psychic abilities sounds familiar. That's because it was used as the inspiration for Netflix's most popular television series, Stranger Things. Much of Charlie's story is paralleled in the journey of Jane, better known as Eleven, whose parents, like Charlie's, became involved in experiments they shouldn't have. Both characters struggle to control their abilities, to protect those they love, and to retain their identities. Both girls lose their parents and chances at normal lives, and both are finally placed in a facility with only their powers to aid their escapes. An avid Stranger Things fan, I had to read the book, which was one of its greatest inspirations, and I wasn't disappointed. From Charlie's hard life on the road with her devoted father, who has abilities of his own, to the experiments and manipulation she's forced to endure when finally captured, Firestarter is one of King's most suspenseful and action-packed reads. It's a story that kept me tense throughout, while also making me care about the characters at its heart. Filled with narrow escapes, heartbreak, and unexpected heroes, it's a worthwhile read. Number 3 on my list is It. One can't call themselves a King fan without having read one of his most famous works, It, a story that is equal parts horror, mystery, and coming of age. It features many horrific moments, literally dripping with gore or sloshing with sewage. But some of the moments which scared me the most didn't involve the infamous clown at all. As with many of his books, King also takes the time to explore the book's human monsters. In addition to grisly murders, there are also psychopaths, lunatics, and an abusive father. Figures which are every bit as disturbing as the supernatural entity terrorizing the small town of Derry. With this in mind, the book is as much a psychological horror as a paranormal one. Most readers, whether they've read the book or not, are familiar with its antagonist, the shape-shifting clown Pennywise. However, one of the book's biggest draws is the mystery surrounding Pennywise. After all, a clown is but one of many forms he can take. While it's one of his favored forms, he can turn into many people or creatures, making his true identity a mystery. The book's other greatest draw is its characters. Over one of King's longest books, we follow the self-proclaimed Losers Club, a band of misfits who come together once more as adults to fight It for a second time. Defeating him as children, the troubled adults must return to destroy him once and for all, discovering in the process where he came from and what he actually is. Spoiler alert, It's true form is every bit as creepy as his killer clown guise. Pennywise is a terrifying antagonist, but the human monsters also ramp up the tension. If dealing with a monster wasn't enough, the Losers Club also has to face down bullies, all of them psychopaths in the making. These bullies are horrifying, and one of the moments that almost made me put the book down actually involved one of them. That's how messed up these kids are. As for the heroes of the story, theirs is also a coming-of-age story. Each of their characters are well developed. The book makes us familiar with not only their quirks, but with their lives and the trials they face as children who struggle to fit in. While we also follow their lives as adults, the book takes equal time to explore their childhoods. We learn where they hang out, how they met, and what propelled them to face It in the first place. All moments which make us feel like we're a part of their club too. Of course, if this premise, a group of outcast children facing a great and mysterious evil, also sounds familiar, it's because it, like Firestarter, is one of the biggest sources of inspiration behind Stranger Things. If you love the crew that was Mike, Dustin, Lucas, Max, and Eleven, you should follow the adventures of the Losers Club. The Losers Club even has a Max archetype, a redhead, and the girl in a boys' club who has to contend with abuse at the hands of a male relative. Max wouldn't exist without the inspiration of Beverly. In fact, none of the characters we've come to obsess over would exist if they weren't based on characters like Bill or Eddie. Plus, even the newest It films reflect this inspiration. Casting the actor who played Stranger Things' Mike, Finn Wolfhard, is one of the members of the Losers Club. If you loved Stranger Things and you finished with Firestarter, it should be on your TBR list. To this day, it's one of the Stephen King books which spooked me out the most, making it more than worthy of appearing on everyone's Best of King list. Number 4 on my list is The Shining. Along with it, The Shining is one of Stephen King's most famous and popular works, and for good reason. As with it, the characters are well developed, and the story begins in a seemingly mundane setting, following a family of 3 as they travel to look after a hotel through the winter season. Everything seems unusually calm. However, as with King's other books, the ghosts aren't the only threat. There's also the very human monster that is Jack Torrance. A troubled writer with a history of alcoholism, Jack is a very real character. He isn't even a bad person exactly, despite doing bad things. In fact, it's easy to feel sorry for him. He wants to be a better father to Danny, especially after his drunkenness once caused him to break his son's arm, and he cares about his family. Unfortunately, his weaknesses and the addiction he's barely kicked make him vulnerable to the Overlook Hotel's lively ghosts. What's more, the presence of the ghosts is amplified by Jack's son, Danny, who has powers of his own. Sporting an ability known as the Shining, Danny can sense things. He can catch glimpses of the future, and he can see ghosts. Anything supernatural, including entities which are decidedly malevolent, will be drawn to his powers. Danny's shining is both a blessing and a curse, but mostly a curse when his presence awakens the Overlook's many spirits, including those who mean to take his father for their own. I loved the story for the time it took with its characters, the vivid scenes, and the slow burn of the horror. The beginning of the story seems slow, yet descriptions of how the fire hose looks like a snake, or how the ornate markings on the carpets resemble a jungle, create an immediate sense of unease, as even the most ordinary objects or places are cast in a sinister light. The fact that Danny has a premonition of his father killing him also leaves the reader feeling unnerved, even as everything seems normal. Throughout the calmest passages, such as Jack having a snowball fight with his son, Jack going about his work, Danny's mother Wendy considering the past, or Danny exploring the hotel, we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. If you like slow burn suspense, fleshed out characters with all the unnerving psychology that entails, and children with supernatural abilities, The Shining, one of the books which consistently appears on the Best of King list, is worth your time. Number 5 on my list is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is another story in which King places us in the shoes of a child. When Trisha becomes lost in the woods, a mundane but very real threat, the girl comes to realize that she might not be alone. As a psychological thriller, the book is scary enough. Hopelessly lost and plagued by hunger, Trisha's life is in danger without any monsters. If almost starving to death wasn't bad enough, Trisha also has to face the loneliness of the forest. With no one to talk to, and facing the possibility that she might never see her loved ones again, Trisha's only contact with the outside world is her pocket radio, which allows her to listen to the games of her baseball hero, Tom Gordon. Having Tom Gordon for company and something familiar to cling to, Trisha is able to retain what remains of her sanity. However, her deteriorating condition also adds a level of ambiguity to the story. As she begins to find signs of something deadly, such as claw marks and dead animals, it's not clear if there really is a monster or if, in her poor state of health, Trisha is simply hallucinating it all. Whatever the case, the monster she faces, the very unknown which surrounds it, adds a creepy supernatural element to a story that's already tense. As an added bonus, Trisha as a character is also engaging. Despite the challenges she faces, she retains a plucky attitude. Occasionally sarcastic and even hopeful, she's easy to root for. Other children protagonists can fall into the trap of being whiny or helpless, but this isn't the case with 9-year-old Trisha. Optimistic, resourceful, and stubborn, Trisha will keep readers on the edge of their seats because you want her to win, to survive the odds stacked against her. I won't tell you if she lives or not. All I can say is that this is a great book, and worth the time of anyone who loves King's works. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is also a shorter read, making it more accessible than some of his longer stories. Often left off the best of lists and overlooked by King's most devout fans, this is an underrated gem which deserves more love. I can't talk about this without honorable mentions. Before I close out this video, I have to throw in some honorable mentions, lest I offend anyone. Other stories I've enjoyed in the King canon include the Dark Tower series, The Stand, Joyland, The Eyes of the Dragon, The Cycle of the Werewolf, Salem's Lot, Misery, and Carrie. With only 5 entries, I couldn't possibly include all of my favorites. King has written dozens of books, and to attempt to describe every story of his I've enjoyed would require 3 videos at least. Everyone has heard of the Dark Tower series, and I love those books not only for the characters, which include an adorable animal sidekick, but for their ability to bend and mix genres in a way I've seen few other authors attempt. They can be heart-pounding horror, but also fantasy magic, sci-fi adventure, and tragic romance. The Stand is also a remarkable book. However, it's not for the faint of heart, especially if readers choose to tackle the unabridged version. Featuring a classic story of good versus evil, following in the wake of a pandemic, it's a thick book, clocking in at 1,000 pages plus. Also, the very ideas explored within the story, such as a devastating illness or the crumbling of society, while brilliant, might hit a little too close to home for some readers. While I wholly recommend the book, any reader should be prepared for a long and occasionally gruesome adventure. As for Joyland, it, like The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, is another underrated but wonderfully written story. While it features a ghost, it chooses to focus most on the characters and mystery elements. It follows a 16-year-old boy still reeling from heartbreak as he takes a summer job at an amusement park. If the setting itself wasn't enough to entice readers or the identity of a very real killer, the book also features a bittersweet subplot in which the protagonist befriends a boy in a wheelchair who likely won't live to adulthood, along with his mother. It's a short read, but one I recommend to anyone who needs a lighter King read or a heartfelt coming-of-age mystery novel. Then there's The Eyes of the Dragon, which breaks from King's typical genres in that it's an outright fantasy. This isn't to say it doesn't have its unnerving moments, but the book is still more classic fantasy than anything. Plus, it features an antagonist readers will recognize if they've already read The Stand or the Dark Tower series. I'd recommend this book to readers who love dark fantasy. If you've just come off a Sarah J. Maas binge, or you're simply a fantasy fanatic, The Eyes of the Dragon is a great read to lose yourself in. Next, there's The Cycle of the Werewolf, a novella readers will be able to read in one sitting. It's a straightforward werewolf tale, chronicling the monthly victims of the monster in a small town, but with beautiful but grisly illustrations and an unexpected hero, it's worth checking out. Plus, it went on to inspire one of my favorite films of all time, Silver Bullet. Silver Bullet makes significant changes to the plot, choosing to focus on one little boy as he tries to unmask the human killer behind the murders. But these changes are for the better. The film isn't everyone's favorite, but it has huge nostalgia for me. I loved it as a kid, even though it's most definitely not a kid's film. And when I read the novella, I take pleasure in seeing the inspiration behind one of my all-time favorite films. Finally, other books I enjoyed were Carrie, Salem's Lot, and Misery. There's not much more I can say about the first two. Carrie also helped to inspire Stranger Things, as Carrie's abilities are very alike to those of Eleven. Able to lift objects with her mind, Carrie's powers have a dark side, a theme explored with 11 powers in the 4th season of Stranger Things, when Elle wonders if she's actually a monster. As for Salem's Lot, it was a must-read for me, not only because I enjoy King's work, but because I'm obsessed with vampires. Another small-town story featuring troubled heroes and brutal murders, Salem's Lot is one of King's earliest works, doesn't disappoint. Then there's Misery, one of the few works I've read which doesn't feature supernatural elements. It still kept me turning the pages. Annie is one of King's scariest human monsters, and when the reader learns about her grisly past, they find the type of person who, horrifically enough, exists in the real world. If I had to make a second list, Misery would definitely be on it. A psychological horror, it needs no fangs or claws to make it scary. In conclusion, Stephen King remains the master of the horror genre. While plenty of other authors, old and new, have made their mark, none have made the same impact as King. Rivaled only by the likes of Edgar Allan Poe in fame, King is also prolific. Even if you've set out to read every book he's ever written, the fact he continues to churn out new works assures it will be a long time before you run out of material. For my part, I love his work not only because it's spooky, but because of the time he takes to develop his characters, to create his settings, and to build suspense in even the most mundane of situations. I recommend not only his classics, but those works of his which have been overshadowed by his more famous novels. Next time you need a King binge, consider this list, especially those books you might not have heard of. What are your favorite Stephen King novels? Were there any on this list you hadn't heard of? Sound off in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and happy reading.